Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and today we are talking about a documentary, a Peacock documentary. Walt, it seems like we've only covered one of these so far, the Ric Flair entry in our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com, but it seems like Peacock is really trying to do not just, the standard WWE style documentaries that we've covered so many times in this show, but like shinier, better, more legitimate documentaries. And again, the Flair one is one I mentioned. The Cody Rhodes one, which we have not covered yet because we just talked about the Rhodes family, is on our docket, will be coming at some point. And then there's Angle on Peacock, the Kurt Angle documentary. And I don't know. What do you make of this recent trend here, Walt, of documentaries that I think are aimed at, a more casual audience and not a specific wrestling nerdos?
Well, the first question I have is, when does a WWE network doc end and a Peacock doc begin?
Well, is there still? I mean, I guess I honestly do not know if they're still making 24 or Untold. I think they are, right? I wouldn't, bet on it, but I think there's some Untolds poking out, right?
Does Angle live on the main page or does it live in WWE?
Angle lives. So I went to WWE tab and I had to scroll kind of hard to find it, but it was recommended to me on the main tab. Obviously, it would be recommended to me because I watch a lot of dumb wrestling stuff on Peacock.
That's very true. SEO.
So I don't know if that's the case, but it definitely was in the WWE tab. But I will say when I went in there, it wasn't splashed on the top Angle documentary. It was in there, and if I had to guess, I suspect it's in the rotation on the homepage as a important quote unquote doc thing.
Well, I guess it just depends on the subject matter, maybe, because I could see Peacock investing in a Angle doc because half of his story is about getting to the Olympics, and NBC, I believe, still owns the rights to the Olympics. So you could kind of brand it as it's this pro wrestler, but also Olympian, and maybe that entices people who wouldn't have cared about the Attitude Era and him shooting milk at The Rock or something. I don't know. Or no, it was the Alliance.
Yeah, he shot Rock at Stone Cold and the Dudleys, I presume. So,
sure.
but yeah, I think that's a great point. The Olympics thing is something I never really thought about, and you're definitely right that the story of Kurt Angle, though he has been a wrestler for the last 25 years, certainly has subject matter in it that is accessible for reasons beyond wrestling. The Cody Rhodes one is a little less easy to pin down why that exists, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So we're not talking about that today. What we are talking about is Angle, and what you mentioned, Walt, I think is by far, to me, the best part of this documentary is the Olympic stuff. Obviously we're a wrestling podcast. We're going to talk about the wrestling elements. This one was a little light on the wrestling elements, in my opinion. It was heavy. The first half, at least, was heavy on the first half of his life, and it's one of those rare lives where we always hear these intro stories. I was born here, I grew up here, I did this, I did that. This is the rare one that has extreme bite to it and real and substance and really, really matters.
This is where actual documentary storytelling and narrative and filmmaking really is important, because this felt like a 30 for 30, at least the first 50 minutes of it, and it's in a good way, because there's you as a wrestling fan, you hear that Kurt Angle has won a gold medal in amateur wrestling. It's you hear that so often that it almost becomes a parody, because it just loses its meaning, especially in the context of Kurt Angle, and all the antics that kind of show from his initial WWE run. But there's some really good stories and narratives within the world of amateur wrestling that I never knew, and they did the work. They found all the footage of his collegiate career and his nationals run and his Olympics run, and they got all the voices. They told the Foxcatcher stuff, and it's damn, this is really good stuff. What an exciting world of amateur wrestling that I never knew about. And I was compelled because of the way they told it, the access they got and the materials, the sporting materials they had.
You're so right, and I never really thought about it that way until you just said it. But as wrestling fans, Kurt Angle has just been around. He's been around forever, and the gold medals were just part of his gimmick. You know, that was for a while. That was his gimmick, and I totally agree with you. I never even like. There was a long time where I did not even care that he had a gold medal. You know, like it didn't bat my. I didn't think it was that cool, but obviously it's incredibly cool. And like this documentary reinforces how insane his journey was to get it. But yeah, I just sort of allowed it to be baked into who Kurt Angle is. You know, like oh, of course he's an Olympic athlete, but yeah, this is really the first time I did step back and go, wow, like this was just a thing that I think wrestling, you get used to them just saying shit, and so much of it does not matter, and you sort of gloss over so much of it. But this is the rare example of like, no, has weight to it. This man is important. We're not just telling you he's important. He legitimately is important.
Yeah, it's also just like a time and a place too, because in 1996, if you stop amateur wrestling and you win an Olympic medal, like the only place you really could go at that point was WWE. Whereas now is, a lot of Olympic. Like they showed Ronda Rousey at one point, and I forgot she was like a gold medalist in judo.
Oh, it was judo. I figured it was judo or jiu-jitsu. I figured it was something like that. That makes sense.
And then she became a UFC fighter, obviously, and then went to WWE. And I feel like a lot of people's trajectory these days, except for was it Gable Stevenson?
Yeah, he's the black hole of charisma though. So
sure, but also he's going back to wrestling, right?
I think he's recently been sort of removed from as of this recording. I think that's very stop start. But you're right. That was the path, and it still is one of the eventual paths. The most people with personality will probably go through is they'll try wrestling.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't go into sport or Kurt Angle's like failed career as a sports anchor or newscaster. I believe that was part of it, right? I think so. Like in Pittsburgh, he auditioned to be like
post Olympics, like in like the late 90s.
I'm not sure where I heard that from. Maybe it was one of the ECW books, and which is another story I thought they were going to touch on.
Yes.
The failed ECW.
I'm surprised they didn't do that. I mean, I guess maybe if Kurt doesn't want to talk about it, maybe for him that means nothing. For us, it means a lot because, like, oh my God, Kurt Angle ECW. But for him, he's probably like, I showed up once, it was insane, and I left. They were all snorting coke off bathroom mirrors, and I said, all right, I'm good. See ya.
Surprised that we didn't take another chance to, or take another opportunity to just like show how they were number one and everything else was number two, because you tried to do ECW, and after crucifying Sandman, it showed that WWF was really the place to be, and not, it's like, okay.
Vince Stillson, Needle Heyman from 30 years ago.
Right. If it was WCW, that would have made it.
Yeah. But yeah, you're also very, very right about the faces and the people involved. Like they did their legwork. We talk about that with Darkseid a lot. Usually they have one or two or three voices. Sometimes people who were there. Sometimes people who were just casually around. And this is just like a cavalcade of people from Kurt Angle's life and from the wrestling world. I will say one thing I found really funny is Kurt Angle's brothers all look like store brand Kurt Angle. Like they all look. If you moosh them all together, I feel like you get actual Kurt Angle. But they all have like some element of Kurt Angle in them, but are clearly 1% as cool as actual Kurt Angle.
Yeah, I think that's how cross pollination works. But but yeah, they are all like remarkably less cool. I will say that.
And some of them seem like real fiery, and some of them seem like very chill. Like it was just good that we got. It is really, really nice to get to hear from all those people, especially if you're going to do that. Actually try and tell the first half of someone's life story and make it matter. Like it really did make his Olympic journey that much more special to see how inspiring it was and how hard he worked. Like again, I just in my head I do not give it enough credit. Like I don't think about I know amateur wrestling is hard. Like I know that objective fact, but the amount, like just the simple fact of showing you that if you win this one, the U.S. Open, you automatically go to the Olympic finals. Like you get to the final match, but if you don't, you have to go through this crazy windy other tournament, and like just little tidbits like that. I would never know that, and adding that sort of depth to the story really makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, like I would have, and then at the end of that tournament, you still have to face the guy you lost to in the U.S. Open.
He comes back probably, but yeah, it's wild how it all works.
It's just funny because we used to have friends in high school wrestling, and it was like, yeah, it's so intense, man. Like you have a workout in the morning for an hour, and then you have wrestling practice for like an hour. I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of it's a
Two
lot of
things.
stuff. And Kurt Angle's talking about literally putting in like 16-hour days where it's just like constant one training session after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next, like back to back to back to back to back. It's like, I guess I have better training science now where it's like, yeah, maybe don't put your body through all that. Like, no wonder why his like neck just like gave out, and like
Yeah.
his body is like so broken, probably because he just completely killed it in his early to mid 20s. But like, yeah, that was insane.
And because you have footage of all of those, old matches and his whole journey to make the Olympics and to win, you like he talks about how hard he works and all that, and you see his technician skills. But when you see the size of all the guys he goes up against, it also reinforces so much. Like this guy sort of needed to do that, what you're saying is, I'm sure, right, that he broke so much of his body by training so hard when he was so young. But like just seeing he's facing guys that are 70, 60 pounds heavier than he is, and he's beating them just because he just will not surrender, and is just, and every mistake you make he attacks it, and like that's amazing to see too. Like just a guy who is truly, it has a David versus Goliath vibe that is real. Like he was winning 1-0, he was winning 2-1. Like I'm sure that's a wrestling score that happens a lot, but he was winning only because you'd fuck up once and then he would trip you, and that would be it, and like the patience and the skill to do that is really wild.
Yeah, and it's funny the way they talk about like fight philosophy. I'm trying to think of the best term. I mean, they didn't actually coin a term, but like the way they're talking about like wrestlers and how heavyweight wrestling works, it's like you would think that this is the first time ever in like training or fighting that, oh, well, if I just condition better than the bigger guy, then I can like gain an advantage. I'm like, I guess like from where I'm sitting in 2023, I'm like, yeah, no shit. Like you just get better wind and do laps around the bigger man. But I guess back then, like, I don't know. I'm sure there was like old boxing matches and like Muhammad Ali, rope-a-dope, and tire out Foreman. I feel like that's been kind of like a thing. But the way they present it, it's like this has never been done in wrestling. He's smaller, yet he's still a heavyweight, and there's guys that are 60 pounds heavier than him. So he's going to be a better
He's
like
going to
hustler.
work out and have good stamina.
Like is he the first person to ever figure this out? Like I don't know. Like it's exciting to see him win and do all this, but I'm like, they made it sound so revolutionary. I'm like, I guess.
I have to imagine that the combination of those two things must be kind of rare, like the conditioning and the commitment to it, like everyone knows, like, sure, that would work in theory, but you'd have to be a psychopath to pull it off. Like you'd have to never surrender, and you have to work out 6 times a day, and then everyone else just sort of falls by the wayside, and it's like, oh, this Kurt Angle guy though is a nut, so he does it and he wins.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to hearing him talk about like his like fixation on the Olympics, not just like not on a healthy obsession wouldn't even begin to scratch the surface of like how this guy approached this sport and this goal. I mean, like this guy was like a maniac. He's like obsessed, but also like what I really appreciated about it, talking about the philosophy, like that stuff is like endlessly fascinating to me. Like watching back a film and this guy like saying like, well, this guy was going for my neck, so then that actually opened his hips up, so that allowed me to do this. Like it reminded me of like, I don't know if you ever saw the 30 for 30. Now we're really going away from pro wrestling now, but
That's all
you ever
right.
saw the 30 for 30 for like the NC State, like the Coach Valvano like run. Like,
Sounds. I think I have, but it didn't stick in my head necessarily.
well, it's just like a really granular look at like this like epic college basketball run, but like everybody on the team is like represented, and they talk about like they break down like the moment that where they were like the game turns, and like these pivotal moments that like when you're watching it you don't really appreciate or understand or like get that perspective, and like this was the same way where it's like, oh, this big guy did this one move and that allowed me to do that. It's like just breaking down the tape like that is just like sports doc 101. Like that's why these things exist and do really well, and people like Yeah, I'll never watch another amateur wrestling match again, but like I could watch this doc 100 times.
Yeah, it's not just it's great because it's not just nostalgia now. It's not just like, hey, remember when Kurt Angle won the gold medal? It's here's an analysis of the whole path he took, and not just here's what amateur wrestling is like, but here's how the matches went, and here's how the crux of sort of how they all fell to his advantage, and it is great. It's such a good way to do it, and I think it's smart, and I'm happy they did not focus on the wrestling side of things. Like we'll get to this in a second. Like I think it is to the wrestling side's detriment, and just because that side is not objectively very good in the first place in this doc, I'd say, and B, just can't really be competitive with the first part because the first part is so great. But when you have so much of this to tell, I'm really glad they took the time and the effort to go through all of the amateur wrestling stuff, as opposed to, and then at No Way Out 99 you fought Triple H, and then at you fought, like, that's so many other docs have done that to some extent, or like cherry picked some great matches, and that's fine, that's functional, but I'm glad they did not do that here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
because they really breeze through the wrestling stuff here, like his WWE career is like a 3-minute montage, and then it moves on to his demons.
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to at least covered, I don't know, the first time he won the world title, like what that meant. But I guess like in the grand, I couldn't even pinpoint when he won or what that meant, like as a fan. So it's hard. Like, I think his memorable matches almost make it or are more important than his title wins in some ways, because he also is kind of like a byproduct of the fact, like the hot potato world title, like during his time, like he might have had it for 2 months and then he lost it and then he gained. It's like, I remember some of these moments, but like his feud with Eddie, his feud with Brock, his feud with like Shawn, like HBK, like, they made a point to talk about like these were the most meaningful things in his career. So I guess they did kind of touch on, I'm kind of going against what I just said, but they did kind of touch on like specific moments just in a different way. But yeah, it was really quick. It really kind of was just painting in broad strokes, which I think is fine.
Yeah, and I think you're right about Angle. Like, he had some great matches, like we've talked about them on the show, Michaels and Lesnar and Eddie and all these ones, but he was never like the guy. He was always a top 5 guy. He's had the title 6 times, so you're right that it's not a ton of times, but it's a few more than I probably would have guessed. And I don't recall any of his reigns being particularly memorable either. Like, at least it wasn't like he won the title at X amazing pay-per-view and held it until the next momentous occasion. Like, he sort of just had the title when it made sense for him to have the title. And a lot of the matches he had were just matches that he had. Like, he didn't have feuds that were, besides Lesnar, which is, I don't even recall. I mean, I'm probably wrong here to a certain extent, but like, I think the match is what really mattered. I don't know if the feud was so amazing. I think it was just the idea that these two amateur wrestlers are getting in the ring together and having a big match at Mania. I think that overshadowed, any sort of reason they were fighting or angle involved. I think that was a lot of his career. Like, he was a great hand and he was so entertaining and valuable, but it wasn't like he was the centerpiece, the main attraction, the guy who was doing fun stuff. He was always just around in a very prominent way.
Right. Yeah.
Could be wrong. I'm not. You're way more encyclopedic on these guys. I mean, although I know your encyclopedic memory falls apart at a certain point, or at least takes a little backseat when you went on to live your life.
Sure. I mean, well, pretty much anything after 1997 becomes a blur. I will say, like, it was nice to see, like, the two main interviewees were like Austin and The Rock. Mm-hmm. It's like they really went for it, but also kind of,
and it wasn't like regurgitated Rock shit either. It looked like they actually got Rock to sit down and talk.
Yeah,
which is because when it's Hogan, they're always like, it's always clips of this Hogan interview we've seen 800 times before.
Right, and they'll date it. It's like 2012. It's like, oh, that's right before something else happened. But yeah, they did like new interviews with like two of wrestling's biggest stars of all time, and it's like, I think that speaks volumes that like The Rock's like, oh, I'll sit down to talk about Kurt. Yeah, definitely. It's like, damn, this guy, like, that shows how meaningful he is to those guys still. But
yeah, and meaningful to wrestling too. Like, it's I think the doc does a really good job of not laying anything on too thick. Like, I think it tells the Kurt Angle story very well, and I think it doesn't by just laying out his accomplishments and all that and showing you how involved he was and obviously showing you what he overcame at a certain point, it just shows how important he is. Like, it doesn't, like, I think one thing that struck me as wild was we don't see his final match. Like, so many of these documentaries end with, you know, the final match and the guy walking off and getting the big final ovation. Like, it's just such an easy way to end a documentary, you know? His last match, of course, like walking off, riding off into the sunset. This one shows his Hall of Fame speech and says, oh, by the way, he had his final match like 3 years later, and Baron Corbin, whatever. Like, it's just, I think that's another really good non-wrestling touch, you know? Like, that is, though it was his last match, it is really a footnote in the career, and it pales in comparison to so much other stuff he's done, and I'm glad we don't try and show that as the bow that ties it all together.
We certainly didn't really touch TNA in a meaningful way.
We sure did not. I think they throw a little shade at it, as you sort of said, like, you know, they can't resist in saying, like, basically he went to the minor leagues, which is true. He went to the minor leagues because he was so messed up on drugs that WWE wouldn't have him around anymore. So, I mean, it was one of those examples of where TNA was truly taking, at what at the time were the dregs of a former great performer.
I mean, I don't think anyone on this podcast or outside of this podcast would ever argue that TNA was a close number 2. So,
or that Kurt Angle did any. I'm sure he did a ton of stuff. He was there for a couple of years, but no one's ever tried to sell me on a memorable Kurt Angle moment from TNA.
Well, they could have touched upon, like, I thought we were going to get this like Kurt Angle Renaissance moment where, because they interviewed Ronda Rousey, I guess for like that one bite about being an Olympian or something.
They got her for 30 seconds.
Like, same with Mark Henry. Like they got Mark Henry a few bites, but like, is it because he's Olympian or because of wrestler or both? It probably checks both boxes. But I thought we were going to get like, oh, like Kurt Angle's back in the fold. It's 2000, like, I don't know, 19 or 18 or whatever, and he's back with Ronda Rousey, who's like the biggest female star, and I don't know. Like,
you're right. That was definitely that was his last big match, right? That should have been his final match, and it really, for all intents and purposes, basically was. He joined the. Remember when Kurt Angle joined the Shield? Do you remember when that happens?
Oh God. Yeah, I do remember that.
But yeah, no, if they had ended with the Rousey thing, I think that would have been good. I think there is room to sort of, as you talked about, to go over, you know, how he was very influential in opening, you know, along with Ken Shamrock, though he was a little later, in opening the door for people with any sort of background in fighting, you know, real or fake or whatever, you know, like, but obviously it's all real, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like people with any sort of, you know, whatever your fighting style is and whatever way you're professing it, WWE is an option for you. And like, it became, to bring in a guy with actual cachet and actual skill and put him out there and have him succeed, I think really probably did remind a lot of people, like, whoa, this is a thing I can do. Like, especially if I can talk a little bit, like, this is a genuine career path where I can be badass and cool. And, you know, but also, you know, don't have to go out there and literally get punched in the face all the time, just some of the time. Like, I think they could have given him a little more, you know, praise as a bit of a pioneer, and it would have allowed that Rousey thing, which was a pretty big deal, to have been sort of a centerpiece at the end, which would have been nice.
Yeah, and you know, you look at like Mark Henry, you look at even Ronda Rousey, even like Ken Shamrock's a great example of this, where it's like all the times, and they kind of talked about this. I don't know if it's Briscoe or JR, but it's like all the times where that doesn't work out, and there's so many times where a fighter or wrestler or someone with success in a different space tries to like infiltrate this world, and it's like. But I do think though that like with I guess hindsight, knowing what we know now, seeing some of those like interviews that he had, like en route to the Olympics and after the Olympics, like you could tell this guy had a little bit more than just like, he wasn't just like a dumbo fighter, like he wasn't just like a mindless berserker, like he actually had something. And I didn't think he was going to be like, you know, Tiny Cowboy had Kurt Angle. Like, I don't think anyone could have ever predicted that. But, like, I think you see glimpses of it. Knowing what we know now is easy to kind of identify. But at the time, you probably didn't think much of it watching him on Jay Leno in, like, 1997. But, like, you know, I think it just shows that like he had something all along, and just wrestling brought it out in the most crazy way. And
he's, you know, like I said, he was incredibly successful. He had the belt a bunch of times. He was certainly a top guy for most of his career, but he was so tough guys in particular, like Vince almost always is going to ask you to be a fool at some point, you know? Like, there's very few wrestlers. The Rock is maybe one of the few I can think of who, I mean, The Rock looked like a fool every now and then, but once he became The Rock, less so. But almost always, you're going to have some gimmick, some angle at some point where you're being like a dumb idiot. And that's just the way it is. Like, you know, you can't just be a badass forever. Like, he'll flip the badass thing on you and make you wear a little cowboy hat. And Kurt Angle, it seems like from second one, he had no issues with looking silly, you know? And I just think for a tough guy coming in like that, that's so unexpected. Like, think about Rousey this last run. Like, for all the hype she had when she came in, what did she do? She didn't do anything of beyond just be Ronda Rousey, and I think that's why everyone got tired of her. And we're like, get this person out of here. Like, she doesn't have it, you know. Like, she has something, she has part of it, but she doesn't have all of it. And the fact that Angle was so willing to look foolish and be silly and be fun, and not only just do it, but like run with it and be hilarious and cut these promos and make such an impact. Like, I think that's just so rare for a guy who comes from his background with his stature to be willing to take the piss and be wacky. Like, I think that it makes me love him watching those guys. Like, so much of what he did was so simple and it worked so well.
I also think it was a time and a place too, because like, you know, I guess Kurt this defeated with Kurt Angle's situation. So you know, I don't want to pretend like Vince McMahon is the genius, but like, I think the Attitude Era was a situation where it's like, if you're not bringing that kind of energy to creative, where it's like The Rock and Stone Cold are bringing props and saying the craziest shit, and like, you know, it's kind of a sink or swim situation. And you know, now with writers, it's like you're regurgitating some like 20 pages of someone else's like garbage, and you have to get that one dumb line in. It's like, I don't know how Kurt Angle would do if he was starting today. Whereas like, you know, Vince is like, hey, get on the mic right now and tell everyone to stop booing. Like, that's all you got. And so you kind of had to take that and do it in a way, like you got an outline, you didn't get a script, and even at that, you got a bullet point. So
yeah, but obviously, like you said, that's now it is clearly what was needed at the time. But like, it doesn't work for everybody, you know. It's not. There's been plenty of people who've come in, and because I believe they brought him in as pretty white meat, and then it just became pretty clear pretty quick, you know, Rock-esque, that it was time to pivot on that. And from what I remember, they pivoted pretty quickly, and he became sort of the Kurt Angle we all know and love pretty quick. And beyond everyone always talks about how quick he picked up the wrestling part, but he picked up the promos and the talking and the charisma parts very quickly as well, which is impressive.
Yeah, I mean,
he was good.
He's a top 20 wrestler of all time and possibly higher.
I was going to say, where do you rank Kurt Angle too, as we're wrapping up here? Where do you put him in your, I feel like he is got to be that high, although he's not someone I think about all the time as one of my favorites, but I can't think of anything about Kurt Angle I dislike. You know, there's nothing about his character, his performances, anything that I ever found unpleasing. I was like, he was just everything he did was so enjoyable.
Would you put him higher than Edge?
Yes, but that's my era bias, because like I missed most of Edge's, you know, actual title reign career. Like I remember early Edge, and I know recent Edge, and the Edge when he was facing Cena and Taker and all that, I was pretty much checked out. So I would say without a doubt. It's hard to say Batista. I mean, I like Batista so much more now. I mean, 5 years ago it would have been Angle in a landslide. Now I might give it to Batista. What do you think? Are you yeses on Angle on both those guys?
Eddie? Should you put him higher than Eddie?
God, that's really hard. No, but also I love like WCW Eddie a lot. Like I was watching in '97 before he was. Again, I never saw main WWE Eddie for the most part. Like I've seen it in retrospect, but I loved Eddie when you and I were watching, you know, War Games in Chris Exusion's basement. So that was when that Eddie was special.
Sorry, I'm just listing like people I consider like the top 15.
No, those are all great
range,
names.
So
those are perfect examples of guys who are around his area. You know, like Batista, less of a good worker, but the rest of them all, you know, great workers, great talkers, like kind of the full package guys who were never, you know, Batista probably is the only one in that group who has been like the top guy, and even that didn't super work out great until now he's Batista. You know, now we all love him to death because he's a movie star. But
yeah. It's hard because I'd have to literally do a top 20.
Well,
And
this sounds like it
then,
might be an episode idea down the line,
oh
right?
boy.
We resisted for so long doing stuff like this, but I mean, it might be fun just to do. It's more fun.
Heels.
It's more fun to do these like mid-range guys than it is the top guys. You know, saying like my number one, Steve Austin. It's like, yeah, great, cool. Like,
Novel
no
opinion.
way, really.
Yeah.
My number two, Ric Flair. Well, HBK. Like it just. Why would we say that?
Yeah. I mean, I will say the HBK.
Yeah,
so.
well, of course. It's just where's the suspense though? It's more fun to throw names out there like that.
We should probably do another draft.
We should. Hey, you know what? It's an idea. I'm tucking this away. I'm getting my little imaginary notepad out and writing this down. So,
Yeah. All right. Well, in any case, so in answer to your question, I don't know where the hell I'd put Angle, but it'd probably be somewhere around 15-ish.
yes. And I think that's, and I think without this documentary, I might not have thought so much about him. So I'm really happy they put this out there. Like, you and I did this because we're like, oh, Kurt Angle documentary. Like, why not? Like, content. We love content. But it's a great story. He's in it, he's overcome his demons. You're going to get that demon stuff with a lot of these stories. And that part's a little rote. But, the first... I'd say, and this is this is a feature-length documentary, but I'd say the first 45 minutes are as good as anything any WWE documentary has ever put out.
Yeah, and you know what? Shout out to WWE Studios with their fancy new front credit, graphic credit.
Their little logo at the front. Yeah, that's nice.
Marvel Studios, get the hell out of here.
It does add a cachet of, it makes them look very fancy. So
they did a good job. So
yeah, they did. And you know what? Like I said, we'll watch Cody someday. I can't imagine it's as good as this, but if they're going to put out stuff like this, that is, has more mass appeal, but is still goes deep into somebody and uses that resource. We always talk about the resources. They have access to all these people. They have all this money. They're just creating content for the sake of content, but they can beef it up and make it valuable. And I feel like this is a really good example of when they put their mind to it, they can make something that actually really matters.
Little do we know that the first 45 minutes of the Cody doc is just a week-by-week breakdown of his amateur high school wrestling career.
We'll see. We'll touch on that very, very soon. That's very, very on the docket for Awesome Truth. But for now, Angle on Peacock. Give it a watch. It's a treat, I would say, right?
Treat.
Gotta be a treat. Yep, there you go. Well, a rare unanimous treat. So that's always good to hear. It's always nice to enjoy some content. If you want to listen to us talk more about Kurt Angle in previous episodes, you can find our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. Subscribe to us for our old episodes as well and new ones. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere podcasts are delivered, we are there. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, great to talk Kurt Angle with you. Delightful. And, maybe someday we'll slot him into maybe we'll someday do a Walt and Steve rank their 20th to 11th favorite wrestlers. And we'll see who makes the cut there.
Yeah, we'll do like 5 Mount Rushmores. I'm trying to do the math. Top 20 be 5 Mount Rushmore. So
keep an eye out for that, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening. And remember, the truth will set you free.